How is that relevant to the topic today? This is the sign you've been looking for. I see some familiar faces in the audience, and many of us over the last decade have been involved in the foundation and the shaping for kind of where we find ourselves right now, with lots of positive signs along the way. But I have to say, I think over the last year or so, we've seen more signs of these trusted data ecosystems and identity ecosystems coming together. So what I really want to do over the next 15-20 minutes is take you through some of those signs and hopefully answer, are we there yet, or are we on the way to being there? Just very quickly, I'm the founder and CEO of MECO, and our focus is on developing enterprise solutions for our partners to allow their customers to access, control, and exchange their personal data. Why I give you that context is when we started on this journey over a decade ago, everyone was saying, why is that important? Why personal data? Why customer identity? And I think that answer is coming more and more to the forefront with a number of things, including the value of a whole new market that's being unlocked. A recent report from Liminal suggests that by 2027, we're looking at a $245 billion net new market. However, over the last 18 months, and we saw a bit of a downturn after COVID, and we're starting to see that uptick now, there was reduced onboarding and a lot of complexity in terms of how to bring customers into this evolution from customer identity management to better customer experiences. And I would like to say that one of the things to highlight today is standards and schemes as part of that evolution, because organizations are finding, in order to be able to bring some of these solutions together for better customer outcomes, it ends up being 4 or more vendor solutions. And I would like to present the idea that bringing our end customer, citizen, patient, student, employee directly into the value chain in a trusted way not only will reduce that vendor overload, but will actually lead to better trust and outcomes. So I'll concentrate a little bit on some things that are happening in the EU and some exciting things that are happening in the US that have been flagged just recently. But what we see is the largest drivers of these ecosystem, the scheme-based evolution towards giving citizens and customers greater control over their identity and their data, are being led in the EU, and particularly by government and financial services. However, the ongoing challenge, and this has been part of some of the challenges with getting the new EU regulation around the identity wallet in place, is just building software that's private and secure and wired for trust, alongside all of the normal things from a security point of view that you can control if you have a point-to-point solution. And so one of the ways that the EU has tried to do this is by passing a range of regulation that ideally will fit together like a nice jigsaw puzzle: the Digital Markets Act, Data Governance Act, the Artificial Intelligence Act, and eIDAS 2. And then what the EU has done is it's looked at these 9 domains to say that within each of those sectors, what can we do to actually promote both cross-border and cross-sector data sharing, but make it very clear that we can put in the hands of the citizen ways to voluntarily share data to the benefit of both business and citizens. And so that has come about with the idea that is now known as the EU Digital Identity Wallet. And the aim of that is to make sure that every member state enables every citizen or resident to have access. And what we have now, just in the last week or so, some clarity about what that roadmap looks like. So 2027 is when we must reach the compliance. So I think over the next year or so, we will see a lot of consulting firms working with large enterprises across Europe to work on strategy, defining what that means for your tech stack, how to implement. And then what we'll probably see through 2025, 2026 is a lot of development. We're waiting until November this year to get some clarity, and I heard in some conversations yesterday people that are working on some of the large-scale pilots. There's still a lot of things to work out, but what is great is that we have a roadmap. And why is that important is what's happening in Europe is helping to inform some of the standards and schemes in other parts of the world. And the idea of this is that if we get this in place for citizens and residents, they will be able to move freely across borders within the European context and manage their digital life, including having credentials and data issued to them, be able to prove something about their identity, store their data, access their data under some of their data rights, track what is happening with their data, and also be confident that when something's gone wrong, there is the ability to revoke. But one of the big challenges that we have is going to be interoperability around the rest of the world. So this is really fantastic within a European context, and this is going to serve hundreds of millions of citizens, but we know as global citizens we need to be thinking about other parts of the world. So the question, and particularly if we take a standard like the mobile driver's license, which is already gaining great traction here in the United States, are we going to find that the great UX experience enabled by wallets by, say, Apple and Google will trump some of the other initiatives, or will we find things like the EU wallet will be able to stand its ground because of the regulatory requirements, or the work of the Open Wallet Foundation that is trying to make sure there's a level playing field for everyone? And why is that important? Because more and more we need to fuse the physical and the digital. We've got to find this way to be able to start a journey in the physical world and then move very quickly to the digital world in a very seamless way. And more, as we move into spatial computing, it's very immersive, it's collaborative, it's more experiential than anything that we've ever known before. So more and more identity becomes context. It's as much what I'm doing and where I'm doing it. So as we connect everything, we're also increasing the data, the identity, and the security considerations. So everything becomes about identity in some way. And one of the challenges is how do we dial up sometimes privacy? I heard this conversation yesterday around some of the EU regulation. Yes, we can get this privacy outcome, but now it's created this security issue. Yes, we've got this security outcome, but now lots of actors have to see what's happening in the whole chain of data, and then now we've got privacy issues. So one of the challenges that we have, one of the new challenges as we enable participation in a more direct way, is if we want this trust and inclusiveness, then we need to start thinking about new governance models and input mechanisms that we don't currently have. And this is not coming from one of our colleagues here that's been working on cybersecurity for years. This is actually a podcaster at the New York Times saying, look, unless we start to think about governance in a different way, we're not going to have great outcomes from a citizen's point of view, which points to the issue that keeps coming up over and over, the increasing loss of privacy and individual rights. Unless we can design for that, unless we can think about how we anchor trust in commerce and transfers between the physical and the digital. If we think about, we've established trust in the physical world, what is it we need to do to anchor to that data, to that identity, to make sure that trust continues, so that we can very quickly identify in a great customer experience way who or what I am. Why is this important? Well, think about some of the things that are just happening this year and in the next few years. This year, 25% of the world's population will vote. And we know in order to be able to move into a more digital society, and if we want to uphold democratic principles, we need to know that there is trust in that whole experience. If we jump ahead to 2030, the EU is already focused on developing what they call a digital product passport. So when you buy a product, you'll be able to see the provenance, maybe where the materials came from, whether or not the company is free of any human trafficking or have ever had any violations, what's the environmental footprint, has it been recycled. So we're moving to sort of this nutrition label on products, and we'll need to be able to make sure that we can trust everything that is in that supply chain. So we're getting to a place where everything can be uniquely identifiable. which means it is also possible to assign some sort of unique value. However, if we do that, I've gone too fast. We need to be able to seamlessly use identities and assets between the physical. How will we be able to do that if we don't embed that trust? So we may be able to join up the whole supply chain, but if we don't have those trust anchors the whole way through, and again, if we're moving more and more towards an AI-enabled world, and some of the keynotes yesterday, the opening keynotes, have focused on some of the issues that we already have with deep fakes, we are at the mercy of AI-generated content that looks incredible. It's very easy to, hear or see or read and immediately think, that I hear that voice. That is my granddaughter calling, asking for money, or that is, the number of our team members that get an email from me, particularly when I'm traveling, saying, hey, KD, I understand you need me to authorize this transfer. And, we all know that it's a phishing attack, but it's becoming more and more sophisticated that these things are in context. And I think that's part of the focus that we need, is that when we bring people directly into the experience as actors, they can also help us to manage the context. We also understand that one of the challenges that we have is this amplification of inequality, discrimination, and also we've now got a decade of data that is starting to show impact to teens. And so we need to be starting to think about how we manage identities at different stages of life so that we can also build protections in. So that a lot of that is happening in the EU within a regulatory environment and some very clear regulation. Two exciting things that are happening here in the US. One is a draft bill before Congress for a federal Privacy Rights Act, and this will be the first federal standard for comprehensive privacy and security regulation. And I've listened to a couple of podcasts from some of the members of Congress that have proposed this, and they're saying it will be even more far-reaching than GDPR. So that's really interesting. If that happens, can you imagine what that's going to do to this whole landscape and opportunity in the US as a market? The other is the California Senate bill mandating digital ID verification and user labeling for large platforms that's distributing AI content. So I think one of the other trends that we're seeing is that provenance will need to be embedded in everything. And it's very difficult to have that provenance embedded in everything if you haven't established that trust with a citizen, a patient, an employee, to be able to have them participate and also help to manage the context. So what we're starting to see now is that we need new tools, new workflows to manage this verification and revocation. There's obviously a lot of talk over the next few days around verified credentials, the work that we're seeing out of the OpenID Foundation, out of W3C, in enabling these capabilities to put these tools in the hands of customers and citizens. But that also creates both opportunities and challenges for how those things are embedded in a traditional SIAM stack. And at the same time, we need to be able to give, well, certainly within a European and increasingly in countries like Australia that has the consumer data right, we need to be able to give citizens the ability to exercise meaningful control. We also have challenges in this design around who controls the keys and how do we make sure that we get this balance around ethical, safe, secure, and high assurance outcomes. And a lot of that is the devil is in the detail of how we're managing keys. So I'd like to just finish up very quickly with a high-level SWOT of what we see happening with this journey of things really starting to converge. I also see members of the Connect ID team and NAB here in the audience, and I think that's, if you get a chance to go to the panel tomorrow, that's another fantastic example of an ecosystem that's coming together with multiple actors to hand that control and hand those opportunities to citizens, and reinforcing that it's actually actors working together that create that outcome. So one of the things that we see the strengths is this idea of decentralization and interoperability. And I don't mean blockchain. I mean decentralizing the risk, sharing it, having actors collaborate that moves and distributes that risk around an ecosystem so that it is more manageable, and it's manageable through interoperability. Weaknesses are always going to be around privacy and security. You know, no matter what we do, there will always be a new threat vector. So we're going to be constantly coming back to how are we managing privacy, how are we managing data rights, how are we increasing security. In terms of opportunities, that's a keynote in itself. Everything. Voting, media, reading an article, enrolling in school, taking a flight, going to the hospital, like you name it, every aspect of life touches the things that we're exploring over the number of days that we're here together at Identiverse. So literally everything is going to be touched through this rewiring of our digital infrastructure. And then threats increasingly are around digital rights. And this has even been a point of tension in Europe, where once there was sort of a cohesive sense of what democracy looked like across all the member states, there is some friction now where you have some member states saying, well, we're very comfortable with this security posture, but we're concerned about our citizens crossing a border and being within this context, and therefore, you know, how we can manage their rights. So in summing up, I think the most important thing, there is fantastic work happening in technology. I mean, that's our bread and butter. We're really excited about the innovation, but the technology itself is not enough. If we want to see this positive change, then we need to be working right now on these social contracts of interoperable. We need trust schemes, and in order to see the change we want, we actually need to start creating these ecosystems, and it all starts with interoperability, how we establish trust, and how we work together, because I think there's a lot of evidence that these are the signs we've been looking for. Thank you.